Johni Broome and Baker Mazara are back with Bruce Pearl to hunt down an SEC title this season. Auburn is one of the front runners in the SEC this season, and they are stacked full of talent and experience.
Their biggest obstacle? Maybe in-state rival Alabama, but if things play out like so many expect, we could see the SEC regular season champion be crowned in Neville Arena this season.
It's Auburn season preview today on the Hoop Southbound Show.
Auburn Tigers, there's a lot of optimism around Auburn coming into this year. Maddie, just some overview, grand sky-high viewpoint on Auburn this season and what your kind of thoughts are on the Tigers coming into this year.
Obviously, the biggest thing you got to pay attention to, you got two of the best players on your team returning in Johni Broome and Baker Mazara. And you got Bruce Pearl, who's still on the hunt for an NCAA title, for an SEC title. And I think you might get one of those this season as long as everything shakes out the way it's supposed to.
Bruce Pearl has been one of the best coaches in this conference for some time now. And he's had, not just at Auburn. He's done great at Tennessee as well, and he's going to go down as one of the best coaches at Tennessee as well as Auburn, because he's brought this Auburn team to such a level that the conversation we're about to have about Auburn is what's expected now about the Auburn Tigers and being one of the better teams in the SEC. A big part of that is the success that Bruce Pearl has brought this program. This is another year that I think should be a year that Auburn fans get really excited for. But let's start with last season, just like we did with our other preview with Georgia. Last season was just a weird year for Auburn. Not bad, just weird. You got these high marks and you got these low marks. Not many low marks, but a few. High marks, you won 27 games last year. You finished tied for second in the SEC. You were one of the best teams in KenPom. You won the SEC tournament. Auburn looked like a really darn good team last year. Low marks, I'm really talking about the things that spelled trouble for Auburn. And it was a pretty popular pick last year for Yale to beat Auburn in the NCAA tournament. And those low marks definitely played a factor in some of that thinking. This team only had one Q1 win until the SEC tournament. They played a relatively weak schedule. Shooting was inconsistent at times, and it was kind of all just weird and bubbly all over. And Auburn loses to Yale in the first round of the NCAA tournament, but yet they still finished top 5 in KenPom. I'll let that sink in just a second. You know, in the history of KenPom, only one other team lost in the first round of the NCAA tournament and still finished in the top 5 in KenPom. That was the Virginia Cavaliers, who lost to UMBC, the first time a 16 seed beat a number 1 seed. And I'm not sure, but 2014 Duke and 2023 Purdue might be the only other ones that finished top 10 in the same situation, where they lost in that opening round of the NCAA tournament. I'm not saying Auburn lost for some stats reason or some nonsense, but it was like when you're driving down the road and the check engine light comes on unexpectedly, and then you think, oh yeah, the car has been running a little bit funny. So that was kind of how my impression of Georgia, or not Georgia, we just got done talking about Georgia. Auburn was last season. Darn good basketball team. Just some things that needed to be fixed, and a team that didn't get challenged a lot. Maybe we're just a little inflated in stats.
Yeah, but David, do you know what that Duke team and Virginia team that you mentioned did the following year after getting bumped out of the NCAA tournament in the first round?
Lay some knowledge on me.
They followed it up with a national championship, and Purdue made it to the national championship game the following year.
Never doubt unfinished business and experience. Auburn's got stuff left on the table that these seniors and graduates would like to take care of this year.
Some of the other storylines going into this season, this Auburn team is being consistently picked towards the top of the SEC and looks to have a legitimate shot of winning the SEC title. And a big reason why is all the experience they're returning to this team. I mentioned earlier, you've got Johni Broome, you've got CBM, Denver Jones also coming back. They're all back, and they were one of the best teams in the conference last year. So take that, add a year of experience, and this is what we got.
And continuity as well with a really darn good basketball coach. Let's see what happens. Yeah, but the other team that's being picked up there, Auburn knows exactly who they are. This might be the best season we've seen in the Iron Bowl of basketball rivalry because if projections hold, each game will play a significant factor in determining who will be regular season champs. And the final game is in Neville on the last day of the regular season. That is the best scheduling we got of the SEC this year, and they may have delivered on what might be a primetime chaotic showdown of the year. People across the country are going to be wanting to watch that one. I'll go as crazy to say that that game has a chance to be like Georgetown St. John's in 1985, John Thompson's sweater game big. If you know your basketball history, that was one of the most watched regular season games in the history of the sport.
And another storyline that's not getting near enough attention is how this Auburn roster was put together over the last few years. John Rothstein used to call Eric Musselman the importer. Well, if Muss is the importer, then Bruce Pearl is the portal master. Denver Jones, Johni Broome, Chad Baker Mazara are all big stars on this Auburn roster, and they were all transfers. Then you're going to add JP Pegues and Miles Kelly out of the portal as well. Bruce Pearl has not only brought in talent from the portal, but he's kept a lot of it to build the core of this team.
And it's not the radical approach Eric Musselman did in the portal, but it's certainly aggressive, and it's a big reason for Auburn's success over the last few years. And they don't have to recruit dependent because of it. They don't have to rely on freshman incoming talent. They do well in the portal and find guys who stay at Auburn and have success. Auburn's been very selective, really, in their freshman approach, and they've been more than successful.
Yeah, so speaking of some of these players, let's go to the players that you need to know about on this Auburn team. Guess what? They all came out of the portal of our list as well. So
Yep.
we've talked about him a lot this season, but obviously a player that, unless you've been living under a rock, you've heard his name. This Auburn team, the star here, Johni Broome.
Johni Broome is Auburn basketball right now. I mean, he is the face of it. He's the guy everyone's concerned with. He's got a pro future possibly in his way. So 16.5 points per game last season, 8.5 rebounds. He was effective. He started adding a little bit of a three ball to his game, shooting 35.4% from the floor, from three, and then 54.8% from the field. Only real big concern is his free throw shooting, which he was only like 60% from the line last year. He's going to be the guy to watch. We all know it. It's who he is. We've all come accustomed to getting to know Johni Broome. He's a big time basketball player. He's one of the best big men in this league. Might as well circle him right now as a player that you need to watch this Auburn team. It's not a joke. All right, player number 2 on our list is the man in the backcourt everyone might need to know, and that's Chad Baker Mazara. Maddie, thoughts on Chad Baker Mazara?
I mean, backcourt, front court, this guy can do it all. He's like a Swiss Army knife. And last season, he put up some big numbers for this Auburn team. Obviously, he's, a player who's become known, may not be in a good way or not, but, my thoughts on Chad Baker Mazara, if anybody's into NBA basketball, you got the Bad Boys basketball back in the early 2000s with the Pistons, and that's the kind of vibe that Chad Baker Mazara gives me. So he's a great basketball player, but he's also kind of seen as the villain. So I'm interested to see kind of what his story arc is going to be at Auburn this year. But, if you've got him and Johni Broome together, like I said, front court, back court, whatever, he's like a Swiss Army knife. Those two are going to get this Auburn team to a good place this season.
Chad Baker Mazara not only had a good year last year where he put up 10 points a game and was one of the better players in the backcourt for Auburn. Bruce Pearl's talked about him quite a bit, and he's talking about him having an NBA future at this point. And Chad Baker Mazara's got the talent. Let's see how much he can raise his game this offseason and take it to the next level. I've got big hopes for what he might be able to do. But you just look at last year, the two stats that jump out to you, it's 10 points a game, which isn't crazy, 41.8% from three. We talk about the magic number all the time. 40% is even better. So keep shooting that and you're going to see some success for the Auburn Tigers this season. And like I said, another year of continuity hurt no one for this Bruce Pearl team.
Yep. And then we've got our final portal entry, which is the new guy, JP Pegues out of Furman. Another exciting guard transfer to this Auburn team just to stack the list a little bit more.
It's weird because JP Pegues was a very good pickup, and nobody really talked about it this offseason. It's like he got buried in all the chaos going on at Arkansas and Kentucky bringing in these 40% three-point shooters and all this crazy stuff. But JP Pegues is a good basketball player, and you might have got to know him just a little bit in the NCAA tournament the year I picked Furman to be my mid-major spotlight team last year. And he was the one who hit the game-winning shot against Virginia to upset four-seed Virginia back in that tournament last time Furman was there. Furman's a good program, and they put talented players together, and the SoCon is a pretty darn good conference at the mid-major level. He had 18.4 points per game, 4 rebounds a night, and almost 5 assists a game, and he plays decent defense, too. He had 1.2 steals a game last year. JP Pegues is right now one of those players not getting talked about enough as one of the better transfer portal additions out of the portal this year to the SEC. So look out for JP Pegues. He can play at an upper tier level. He's seen P6 competition in his career, and he's been successful at it. So keep an eye out for JP Pegues this season. All right, let's go over to the overall roster, and let's start in the front court, which looks to be Auburn's biggest strength. Johni Broome, CBM, that you mentioned, he also plays in the backcourt. He's really more of a hybrid player. Dylan Cardwell, Chaney Johnson, Chris Moore, Adrian Scott, Ja'Kai Howard, Jaheim Hudson. Maddie, let's lay out some of those thoughts on the front court. What are you thinking here? We know the big name, Johni Broome.
Yeah, so I mean, if you watched our Georgia video, I talked about how you usually look at the front court and there's not a lot of depth here. What I'm looking at is you've got a lot of filler pieces. When, you look at a basketball team, the majority of your guys who are either going to get injured, I'll knock on wood because I don't want that to happen. But you don't have a lot of room to kind of play around in the front court. But this front court is deep. And, you mentioned you got the Swiss Army knife CBM that can play both. You've got Johni Broome. You've got Dylan Cardwell, who played last year, who had some good minutes, very productive. And then, like I said, you've got depth in there. And I think that's going to be a big difference maker, especially in those games where it came down to Johni Broome versus everybody. It's not going to have to be like that.
Well, they really had one big blow to this front court, and that's losing Jalen Williams. And Jalen Williams was an excellent player, and that's the only area of concern I really have in Auburn's front court is who's going to be that number 4 guy. I have a hypothetical theory running in my brain that we may see a little bit more Dylan Cardwell and Johni Broome on the floor together. Dylan Cardwell pairs really well with Johni Broome, and especially with Broome adding that 3-ball last season, gives a little bit more of ability to stretch the floor. That's a hypothetical thing I've been running in my brain. I wonder if Bruce Pearl's thinking the same thing for this season. But figuring out the Jalen Williams situation is what's going to happen next for Auburn overall. But the front court's really good, and we've seen that tandem for the last couple of years with Dylan Cardwell and Johni Broome and that front court working together. I listed on the graphic Ja'Kai Howard in the front court. I kind of put wings in there, and it's whatever. You know how hybrid positions are, folks. But yeah, we can move on to the backcourt here a little bit because the guard play is really good too. You got Denver Jones. You've also got Tahad Pettiford, who's one of the better freshmen coming into this Auburn team and into the SEC this year. JP Pegues, who we just mentioned, out of Furman, and then Miles Kelly out of Georgia Tech, very good basketball player as well. Miles Kelly could be a leading scorer on this team. You just wish he shot the 3-ball a little bit better, but he put up 13.9 points per game and came down with almost 6 rebounds a night, 5.5, and he's a decent-sized guard at 6'6". He's going to be a really good player and someone I think that can really help Auburn out in that backcourt situation this year. Your 2 big losses in the portal this offseason came from Aiden Holloway and Trey Donaldson. So finding some pieces to work on the future and what this season's going to be in the backcourt was very important. Tahad Pettiford, super athlete, super athlete, super fast, very good point guard. Ja'Kai Howard, we also know is a super athlete. I'm curious to see how much he'll grow and how much of a contribution he'll make on this team. He's probably one of the more, I don't know how much playing time he's going to see players, but really good pieces added to this Auburn team this year. Maddie, any thoughts on the backcourt for the Tigers?
Yeah, so we mentioned earlier in the show that one of those things with Auburn last season, one of their big struggles was the inconsistency in shooting. So I think the backcourt is really where they're going to have to make their stride to, either step up and be SEC champs or make a run in the tournament. And I think, with an extra year, Denver Jones, like you mentioned, we got some excellent transfers in JP Pegues, Miles Kelly, hopefully, with a little bit of a coaching change and a little bit maybe better facility, you see a little bit more production out of him as well. But I think the backcourt is going to be my big question mark with Auburn. Can they be consistent? Can they get into a rhythm and work well, mesh well with that front court? Because that, I think, is where you're going to find your gold.
Yeah, and I think that's the overall arcing question. Can the shooting be consistent? Because you got guys in there who can shoot 40%. They need to do that consistently. So,
Yep.
we see that happen because I have faith in Denver Jones. I have faith in CBM. We need to see this backcourt gel because I think that's where the biggest overhaul took place this offseason and figuring out what you're going to do because you lost Trey Donaldson, who was also a decent shooter as well, who shot 41% from three last season. That's a big loss. And then Aiden Holloway, as much as Auburn fans don't want to talk about it right now and are probably pretty upset about him moving to Alabama, he's a good player and he's expected to have a breakout season. So getting JP Pegues was a really, really good move in the transfer portal to add an experienced talented player at that point spot. So I'm interested to watch what's going to happen with the backcourt. I think it's darn good. I think it's a darn good backcourt. I suspect the shooting will improve this season. So we explained this segment in the Georgia episode, but I'm going to explain it again since it's still early in the previews. This season, we're applying a few different things to our season preview to hopefully paint a better picture on each team that we're looking at for the SEC. We're going to take a look at what we call the big three roster items, which are based on Evan Mia's roster research that took place this offseason. And then we're going to take a look at what we call the Champions Index. It's not a number. It's really based on things and items that gamblers look at in March to make educated guesses on who's going to be successful in the NCAA tournament. Note, the Champions Index is incomplete right now because there are more factors that need to be included as the season goes on that we can't really get a feel for right now. But let's go over these things. Big three roster items: talent, playing time retention, and second-year players. For Auburn, the talent portion is relatively moderate. There's not just a ton of elite talent, but they've been effective in the portal over the years. They've got a few high-profile players, but they're not just a stacked full of NBA talent. They're not saying they don't have dudes, but there's guys, there's not that next lottery pick on this Auburn team anywhere like that. But they got talent, experienced, talented players. It's like a moderate talented thing going on for Auburn here. But here's where they have done things really, really well. They've retained a large portion of their playing time, and they have a ton of returning experienced players. They've solidly hit two of the boxes. If you were to rate, you'd probably call it like a 2.5 out of 3 on the roster. Retention, experience, good. Talent, good, not great. So that's where it's at, and this is going to be very effective. I know that sounds a little rough. It's really not. It's really not. This is actually more of a compliment to Auburn, is because they checked a lot of good boxes on building this roster for next season. Now, when you look at the Champions Index, Auburn looks very promising again. Okay, so the items we're looking at here to build this educated guess are the same things we look back in March. If you want to know the full way that we look at this to build our big board in March, you go back in that episode. We're going to be talking about it throughout the course of the season. But the three items that we're looking at here that we can start getting a feel for are who your top scorers are going to be. And you want 2 of your top 3 to be upperclassmen. What percentage you shot from 3 last year? You want to be 36% or better. And how effective is the defense? You want to be in the top 40 in defenses in KenPom. All right, so for Auburn, as we mentioned, there's a ton of upperclassmen on this team, and they're expected to be leaders. The odds of having those experienced scorers are extremely high. Pegues, Broome, and Kelly would be your leaders if stats held from last year. All upperclassmen. Out of Auburn's returning players in the transfers, this Auburn team shot 35.6% from 3 last year. They're just south of that magic number. So just a little improvement shooting the 3 from the roster, and Auburn would be there in that conversation. Then even though I think Auburn's defense was a little overrated last year because of the weak schedule, they still finished top 10 in KenPom last year. And they were certainly a top 40 defense regardless of my thoughts. And they're returning a lot of last year's team. No reason to suspect that Auburn won't again be a top 40 team this season when it comes to their defense efficiency. So Auburn's right there. This team, you can logically put a lot of optimism into next season. They're like a 2.75 out of 3 boxes checked. Shoot a little bit better this season. No telling how good Auburn can be. But Maddie, like we mentioned, this experience on this team and everything else, just how important do you think it's going to be for Auburn? Because when you look at it, we've talked about experience nonstop in this preview, but they're returning 339 NCAA tournament minutes on this team, 58.2% of their offensive production, and 10 out of their 12 scholarship players are upperclassmen. Just how much of an impact do you think that makes for Auburn?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of our viewers are tired of us hearing freshman gonna freshman, and that's not going to be the case this year with the Auburn Tigers.
Nope. Nope,
We've
this
got
is the
a lot
exact
of
opposite.
experience. We've got a lot of experience here, and then you look at, kind of a constant in the NCAA is experience in the NCAA tournament is that experience always wins. And you've got guys that now their run may have been a little short, but they've got NCAA tournament experience.
Yep.
And then you've got guys that are coming in that also have NCAA tournament experience. So I think that is going to help them kind of push over the line that they needed to cross last season to make it a little bit further.
Oh, for sure. I I don't have doubts that you learned something from last year. This team has consistently been in the tournament. There can be a lot of good, positive things, seeing as much talent as they've seen over the years, as much playing time that these guys have spent together. And you don't think they've learned some things over the years together? Auburn's going to be effective, and it's because they've been there and they've done it, and it's going to be a big reason why Auburn's. I feel like if you want to bet on something, put some good money down. Possibly, don't listen to me. I'm not a gambling expert, but put a top betting them top five in the SEC is almost like a sure thing. It feels like that. That's how confident I am in this Auburn team.
Let's go to the schedule. Auburn opens the year against the consistent best team in the American East, the Vermont Catamounts. Then they head to Houston to face Houston in the Toyota Center.
Yeah, Houston's just that team, right? Like they've got another chance this year to win the Big 12. Just keep shaking up everything and give Bill Self problems. But they're returning LJ Cryer, who led the team offensively last year with 15.5 points per game. He's going to have support from Emmanuel Sharp again, Jawan Roberts, and also the Oklahoma transfer, Milos Uzan. Sharp averaged 12.6 points per game and 3.5 rebounds and 1.5 steals a game. Roberts was just south of double digits a game at 9.5, and then Uzan was a really darn good, talented freshman at 9 points per game and got 4.4 assists a game last year for Oklahoma. So it's going to be a difficult matchup for Auburn to face early in the season.
Yeah, I think you got to definitely factor in the fact that they, although aren't playing at home, Houston's going to be at the Toyota Center. So it's going to be a big game. And I think Houston's one of those teams you can't ever count out. So
No, absolutely not.
an early test for the Tigers for sure. All right, then Auburn goes and faces Kent State and one of the most winningest programs in the state of Alabama, North Alabama. Then we're off to Maui, and this is a deep Maui field.
It is very deep. So they get another Big 12 opponent they're going to be facing starting off, and one that Gary Parrish on Ion College Basketball has highly ranked in his top 25 and one, and that's the Iowa State Cyclones. They've been a darn good basketball team over the years. It's going to be a tough matchup in Game 3 of Maui. And then just south of the bracket to them, they got Dayton and North Carolina. I would expect North Carolina to win that game. North Carolina is one of the expected teams coming out of the ACC to have a shot at the ACC title and have a very high seed in the NCAA tournament this year. If we get Auburn, North Carolina, I want you to think last year, Arkansas faces North Carolina in Atlantis and then goes home to play Duke. Auburn's got a situation that's getting pretty similar here. Like they could face North Carolina in the second game of the Maui Invitational and then play their third game and then go to Cameron Indoor to play Duke. That's a wild swing of games there and a very tough one at that. But this is a deep Maui field, as I was saying. Dayton's also a quality mid-major team. I don't expect them to be there, but I think North Carolina, Auburn would be that game 8 in the winner's circle there. And then on the other side of the bracket, guess who's over there? The current back-to-back national champions, UConn's on the north side of the bracket in game 1, taking on Memphis. Then Colorado and Michigan State are also on that side of the bracket. Auburn's going to face one of those teams if they get past North Carolina. Even in the loser's bracket, they'll still have to face one of those. If you're in the winner's bracket, you got a chance to maybe play UConn. We'll see how good UConn is this year. They're still one of the best teams in the country and are going to be tough to deal with. I think personally it's kind of a situation. If Auburn goes 2-0, 2-1 in Maui, that is a darn good trip to Hawaii. And I think they could easily take third place in this thing. Easily might be a little bit of an overstatement. It's a deep field. So it's going to be tough. We'll see what happens in Atlantis, or not Atlantis, but Maui. It's going to be a tough tournament for them. There's a lot of good opportunities, though, to get some Q1 victories in that field out there.
Yeah, I mean, isn't any trip to Hawaii a good trip to Hawaii?
It's always a great trip to Hawaii. It's Hawaii. Like, what could you say about it? It's, to me, it's my favorite time of year in Thanksgiving, and obviously they'll be the featured team this year for our MTE week video that we do in that podcast episode because, of course, it's Maui. We'll be wearing our Hawaiian shirts and saying aloha to Auburn at that time of year, but it's going to be a great string of games there. And then, as we talked about with some of those factors, the teams that are in the top 12 in week 6, that normally comes a little bit after the MTEs. Auburn could be in that top 12 group. And that means typically your national champion comes out of that week 6, top 12. At least it has for the last 20 years. So we'll see if that trend continues. Again, last team to break that trend was Syracuse in 2003 with a guy named Carmelo Anthony. So we'll see if Auburn could be in that top 12 coming out of Maui in the games that they have in front of them.
Yeah, for sure. So hopefully they get some R&R while they're in Hawaii because then they've got to come home for the ACC SEC Challenge, and Auburn is heading to one of the best home environments in Cameron Indoor to face Duke.
That's going to be a tough road trip, and I mean, get excited for it because there's a lot of talent on this Duke team. Duke's returning Tyrese Proctor. He was the captain last season, 6'5" guard, very good, 10.5 points per game, finished with 118 assists last year. He was all ACC. Duke's also returning Caleb Foster. And then there's this guy, I don't know if you've heard about him, if you've paid any attention to college basketball this offseason, but this guy who's just apparently really good and from Maine. Cooper Flagg. Cooper Flagg's getting a lot of talk, and like he looks to be like he might be the number 1 pick in the 2025 NBA draft. He's probably the biggest recruit in the madness that's surrounding a recruit to Duke since Zion Williamson. So a lot of attention to be paid to Cooper Flagg for this. He's going to be the centerpiece. He's going to be 17 years old, and people are thinking that he's going to outplay a lot of college basketball players. And there's already talk about him being a National Player of the Year candidate. So that's going to be a heck of a matchup that Auburn has to deal with.
Yep. And then they go home, play Richmond, and then have to follow it up with another P6 matchup against Ohio State.
Ohio State has got some names that you might be familiar with from this conference from last year. Aaron Bradshaw from Kentucky is joining Ohio State for next season, and Meechie Johnson from South Carolina is returning to Ohio State because he originally played there. Meechie Johnson last season for South Carolina was a big piece in the success that they had, but 14.1 points per game, 4.1 rebounds, and 2.9 assists. They've also got Sean Stewart, who transferred in to Ohio State from Duke. Some really good, talented players there. It's still a lot of questions around who Ohio State's going to be, but obviously they were a team that did well in the NIT last year. So we'll find out what that matchup's going to entail. Could be a Q2 opportunity and a good one at that for Auburn in that game.
So then they play Georgia State and follow that up with another high-profile matchup against Purdue.
Yeah, so the good news is Zach Edey's not there. Johni Broome versus Zach Edey will not be happening. But there is somebody in the paint that you need to pay attention to. Lance Jones was a great sixth man off the bench for Purdue last season, and he's a very, very talented player. And then as well, you got Mason Gillis, Ethan Morton, and then some other names that you may be familiar with. Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer are also returning for Purdue. Purdue didn't lose too much this offseason, but obviously not having Zach Edey is going to be a very different feel for Purdue this year.
And before we start SEC play, Auburn will wrap up the non-conference with Monmouth.
Yeah, a lot of good opportunities for Auburn to get some quality wins. This is a much better non-conference schedule than we saw last year, and we're going to know who Auburn is this year. We're going to know it for sure because the teams they're facing we're going to get a definite answer out of the quality opponents they're going to face. They're going to have a lot of Q1 opportunities between November and December. And with that schedule they put together, that is a tough gauntlet. And I love it because that means we're going to get some great basketball early in the season. Let's jump to the SEC schedule. Auburn has at home Missouri, Mississippi State, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Florida, and Arkansas. On the road, they got Texas, South Carolina, LSU, Vanderbilt, Kentucky, and Texas A&M. And then their home and home series, they've got Georgia, Ole Miss, and Alabama. Maddie, thoughts on that SEC schedule?
So looking over the SEC schedule, I don't see too many dropped games at home, which is a good sign for Auburn because
They
obviously
shouldn't.
dropped games at home mean you're losing points in the net. You look
Yeah,
at the away schedule, I think you've also got several winnable games here, but there's a couple that they could drop, depending on how these teams shake out. And then home and home, your biggest spotlight here is going to be Alabama. I think, that's where you win one, lose one. We'll see what it shakes out to. But with Georgia and Ole Miss, I'm not too concerned for the Tigers going in there.
I think the Ole Miss trip to Oxford is probably your scariest one out of those home and home series. We're going to see with Georgia this year. They're obviously a team that we have under the radar, but that home and home series, yeah, Alabama's the big highlight. The trip to Oxford against Ole Miss is probably the biggest concern in that. The road schedule, they got some good opportunities on the road, but there's a couple of decent chances at home to get good wins. Arkansas, Tennessee, Florida should be in decent spots in the net. We'll see if they're all top 35, but those should be some really good chances there in Neville for the Tigers to get some Q1 victories. All right, Maddie, what are your expectations for Auburn this season?
So I think we look at Auburn, it's a very different approach to what I had for last season because they're playing a lot harder of a schedule in the non-conference. And then we look at how stacked the SEC is this year, the addition of two teams. There's going to be some good opportunities for them to pick up some good wins, but also some opportunities for them to drop a rough one. So I think we're going to see a pretty successful Auburn team this season, and I think they go 24-7.
24-7. Any thoughts on March and where you kind of see this team shaping out in the tournament?
I think I see them as probably an automatic bid. I don't think it's going to be because they win the SEC,
Well, then they
but
wouldn't be an automatic bid, then they would be an at-large bid.
an at-large bid. But you know what I'm getting at. I think they're going to be a shoe-in. I don't think it's going to be any question that Auburn's going to make the tournament. I think we see them get to maybe the Elite Eight. I think is a good spot for them.
I definitely think second weekend is on the table for Auburn, and it's something very real, and maybe even further depending on how that shooting goes. I'm like you. I don't think they're going to lose many games at home. They got a couple that may get a little shaky in SEC play and would be more difficult ones like Arkansas and Tennessee and are going to be some tough ones there, and then Florida as well. But the other ones at home seem winnable. Alabama is going to be a tough one also there at Neville at the end of the year. Like we said, that one may determine who wins the SEC regular season because Auburn and Alabama are getting talked right up about the top of the conference. So it could definitely happen. I've got this team 23-8. I think that's a tough schedule, and 23 games is pretty darn respectable. I don't know if it's necessarily you've got said 24, right? You came up with 24. I'm saying 23. I think Vegas honestly is going to be right around that 23, 23 and a half, 24, 24 and a half number because they could win 25. That could also be on the table. They could be darn good and we could see them win 27. Who knows? But it's one of those situations where they've got a lot of tough games and not the ball doesn't always bounce in your favor, and that's fine. We saw what happened with Alabama last year where they faced that gauntlet in the non-conference schedule, and Auburn's got some really tough games ahead of them that they're going to play, and it's going to build experience and everything else. I think this team finishes top 5 in the SEC somewhere, and I've been saying this to you off camera. I think that there's going to be a team who finishes outside the top 5 because of how deep and talented this conference is this year that may have Final Four potential. Like there may be a team who's outside the top 5 in the standings this year that just runs the table through March because there's that many quality games. So we're gonna see how it all shapes out. But right now, I'm pretty much like Auburn's in the top 5. They've got to be. They've got to be in the top 5 because of their experience and what we've seen out of this team. And I don't think we're going to see any kind of a drop between years between these two between this program between year to year. So Very excited for Auburn. I think this is a good year. This is a darn good basketball team. You got to love the retention and the talent that's coming back to this team. Like I said, it may not be the most talented team on paper, but this team knows how to play big basketball games. And they got a home environment that's right behind them. Those fans are fantastic at Neville. It's a tough, tough place to play basketball there on the Plains nowadays. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. If you have not already, please like and subscribe to the show. We love having you guys here. We have more season previews on the way. We're going to be talking teams all the way from now until basketball seasons, exciting times. Like we were mentioning in the beginning of the week, every week, we're not far away from basketball season now. We're less than 2 months away. So please like and subscribe, and we'll catch you guys in the next one.
Thanks, guys. Have a great week.